Hello, and though I said that we would not do an additional prime time before the end of the summer, well, I will immediately contradict myself with some hard news that I wanted to share with you, because in our little watchmaking world, this info will shake a few things or two. Summer historically marks a real slowdown of the industry. Many factories and ateliers simultaneously are closing down, so they won't operationally impact one another by doing so. So these last few days can be compared to the last episode of your favorite TV series, and bada boom! You have this massive thing happening in this season finale that you didn't see coming, and from then on, well, you simply can't wait for the next season of our House of Cards, Game of Thrones of watchmaking to start up again. So here's the plot. It is a bit like if NBA superstar Stephen Curry, who just signed a whopping 5-year, $200 million contract to remain with the Golden State Warriors, had been clinched by the Chicago Bulls and became part owner of the franchise at the same time. Albeit the difference that Golden State actually won the NBA. So off we go, and this is going to be a bit B2B, but this info is definitely worth noting. In a previous edition of Primetime, I talked about the strange purchase of Breitling by the private equity fund CVC. I mentioned at the time that this group had no prior experience in the world of watchmaking, and it was therefore quite surprising that they would make such an acquisition. No official numbers were given, but it was rumored that the transaction was set around the 800 million Swiss franc mark, so approximately 800 million US dollars. So not too bad considering today's environment for watchmaking, and the brand could probably have been sold for quite a few pennies more some years ago. The main reason why this sale happened is that the Breitling was a family-owned business, and despite one member of this family being at the helm of the company, Mr. Teddy Schneider, his two other sisters were not too keen in maintaining their participation and preferred to cash in with the sale of their shares, a brand which was originally purchased in the early 70s by the father of these three children. When the transaction occurred, one of the only public information we got was that Mr. Schneider used some of the money of the sale to buy back 20% of the company, the remaining parts being apparently in the hands of CVC. This investment fund is definitely not driven by charity. For instance, they are the ones that possessed Formula One before selling it quite recently for quite a hefty profit to the American Liberty Media Company. And even a money-driven guy like Bernie Ecclestone, the ex-Formula One Supremo, said that he did what had to be done to satisfy the high financial demands of CVC by imposing, for instance, exorbitant Grand Prix hosting fees, which in turn obliged the organizers to sell ridiculously expensive tickets to attend the event to cover these costs, which meant that the general attendance of these Grand Prix was on a serious decline on most of those traditional courses. It was simply too costly for the general public. And therefore, well, it forced some of these historic nations to abandon the organization of these races, something still unfortunately seen today with one of the oldest races on the agenda and home of Formula One, Silverstone, to revoke their commitment of hosting the British Grand Prix. Okay, it will probably come back, but under different terms for sure, and we will still continue to have races in countries where the sport is still young and appealing. But even Singapore is hesitating in pursuing hosting their events, so it just shows the financial pressure put on these organizers. And so it's these guys, CVC, that made their move on Breitling, and there was something seriously bizarre about it from the start. Why would such a forceful investment company pay extra bucks on the dollar when it was rumored that the other big watchmaking players and luxury groups were not willing to pay this much for the brand? Without any knowledge and experience in this industry, why would CVC pay more than the people directly involved in the industry? Well, I could imagine how they could have saved on cost, and that was not necessarily going to be too difficult, but how could they impact the revenue side with no real experience and against the power groups that control the business? How could they make it grow in today's troubled business climate? Well, that was all quite a mystery to me, especially when it was officially announced that this acquisition wouldn't have any impact on the Breitling managing team. So keeping the same people and recipes used for such a long time, for instance, these John Travolta campaigns that probably mean close to nothing to a younger generation. Or remember David Beckham, you know, the one we talked about quite recently regarding being the new face of Tudor now. Well, it would be these same people that would now be able to triple or quadruple the business. Well, you see what I mean. Okay, and to put things in perspective, this acquisition represents only 1% of the total assets of this investment fund, but nevertheless there was something a bit odd, and my feeling was that they bought it because they already knew to whom they were going to sell it. Like a front cover basically for somebody that didn't want to appear yet. But now the story is gently unfolding. But before this, and just to be clear, please don't get me wrong, I think Breitling is a rather beautiful brand with super iconic products, a real legitimacy and history, the Navitimer being of course a perfect example of this. On the technical side, and following Swatch Group's decision a few years ago to drastically reduce the delivery of some of its movements and components to competing brands, something that triggered the arms race in watchmaking and resulting in some very costly investments made by many brands in their internal and often unnecessary production capabilities. Well, Breitling had to follow and also develop their own very own calibers, and therefore gently moving away from ETA supplies. And just as a little side story and just demonstrating yet again that things change, ETA is now kind of going all places trying to find customers for their movements, when just a few years ago they were more or less telling everyone to get lost. A strategy that was all fine when the business was booming and was viable only if it remained like this. But who couldn't have thought that one day things might and will change? At the time, Swatch Group believed that they would keep their astounding and very respectful industrial capabilities mainly for themselves and priorly supply their many own watch brands. Well, but now, well, it's back to reality, and we recently heard, for instance, that the Swatch Group would supply Richemont well after 2020, and therefore contradicting this initial strategy. So yes, the market dynamics have changed, have evolved, the brands and groups need to adapt, and they have to cope with these overcapacitated production infrastructure. And this is precisely something we saw recently with Breitling, who made what I believe to be one of the smartest business moves of the year with their alliance with Tudor. Breitling supplying their in-house chrono movement to Tudor, and the latter supplying their regular three-hand movements to Breitling, seen this year in the new Super Ocean collection of the brand. So what is the big news? Well, Mr. George Kern, the man who made IWC the strong player it is today, well, Mr. Kern had recently been seriously promoted within the Richemont group and was basically overseeing all the watch brands of the group and was trying to replicate the strategy behind IWC's commercial success to all these fine watchmaking brands such as Jaeger-LeCoultre or the illustrious Vacheron Constantin. Personally, I can only respect what he did on a business standpoint, but I am a bit more dubious when it came to the actual products developed and put forward. For me, something that exemplifies this very well was with the revamp of the Portuguese, one of the most iconic timepieces in watchmaking. Well, that's my opinion. I personally think that this new version has lost a little something. IWC, and excuse my language, but I think IWC had some pretty ballsy products, not to mention some of their previous communication campaigns, sometimes a bit sexist, I admit, but now I feel IWC has lost some of its juice. Their watches are fine watches with great technical features. The business has developed exceptionally well thanks to Mr. Kern's vision and management. But on a personal standpoint, most of these watches don't make me dream anymore. And for a product that we don't really need, well, emotions are seriously key in maintaining some kind of power of attraction. Okay, I know that I'm a bit spoiled, and I acknowledge that I have a pretty rare opportunity or privilege of being so close to so many exceptional timepieces. So I know, a little bit biased with this, but when the commercial success of a brand relies almost solely on its marketing, well, this kind of saddens me, because for me, the product is the absolute star. I'm not totally naive though, and I get that brand needs to come up with efficient marketing strategies to exist, whatever the brand, small or big, independent or part of a big group, but nevertheless, legitimacy and substance should really be at the center when we're talking high-end watchmaking. This is no ordinary product, it's no Nespresso coffee machine, neither a dishwasher or an iPhone. Watches are expensive, and generally when you buy a watch, it represents quite something in your personal budget. Should I buy a new car? Should we take this incredible holiday with the entire family? Those are the kind of things you put in the balance when you buy a watch. And on top of it, for many people, they save money for a very long time before making this purchase, almost like it's an achievement in itself. So when all this is only leveraged by marketing, well then it kind of becomes slightly questionable in today's world and evolving values. I know that an iPhone is expensive for what it is, but what you are sacrificing when you buy the latest iPhone is definitely not at the same level as when you buy a quality watch. The trade-off is not the same. Anyhow, and coming back on the matter of the day, Mr. George Kern was let go or officially resigned a few days ago with immediate effect from the Richemont Group. And it is highly rumored that this was triggered by the fact that he will now be heading to Breitling. And not only as its new boss, but also as a direct stakeholder, shareholder in the company. And that's when you start to connect all the dots. So was there some kind of master plan that some people had been working on since already a few months with this move? Well, it is highly likely. Is it a smart move for someone who had one of the most influential and probably highly compensated job position in the watchmaking industry? A job officially handed to him only 4 months ago? Well, yes, it's a pretty damn smart move, and for multiple reasons, even though we still have to talk about this with a little bit of caution. Nothing is fully confirmed or official, but there are quite a few signs regarding the veracity of this information, and I'm pretty sure it provoked a lot of people scratching their heads in the various watchmaking headquarters around Switzerland and even elsewhere. Mr. Kern has a very solid experience and a proven track record, furthermore within the brand with significant aviation-related collection. He's known for this kind of bulldozer management technique, something that can only reassure CVC, I think. And for a brand such as Breitling, he has the ideal profile to make it real big. Like I mentioned, Breitling now possesses strong manufacturing capabilities. Their in-house calibers are state-of-the-art with 3 hand movements, chrono movements, and they even introduced this year a split-second chrono at a very decent price for such a complication, around the 10,000 Swiss franc mark. They have this massive history going for them, and at the same time, they never really played the master of mechanics card. People don't really buy a Breitling watch because of this mechanical dimension, though they are, again, very seriously equipped. But you generally buy a Breitling because they look pretty cool. You buy in this oniric aviation-related theme, you have a sturdy product, and it was more or less affordable. Okay, the fact that they invested so much in their manufacturing facility has had a rather hefty influence on some pretty significant price increase for most of their watches, or than this over the years. But now, with the backing of fresh money, an experienced and talented boss, a retail network of own boutiques still pretty scarce. The first Geneva boutique, or Swiss boutique for that matter, only opened a couple of years ago, and it's a very cool boutique, I have to say. Well, a pretty well-defined and legitimate identity. Well, all the ingredients are there for some serious shake-up and developments, and I wouldn't be surprised if this move won't affect brands that have been going on a similar path recently, such as Tiger, Zenith, and of course brands within the Richemont Group themselves. I mean, itself, IWC in particular. I mean, in fact, I wouldn't be too surprised if Mr. Kern would like to fight directly on Richemont territory and leave Baselworld and take part to the more refined SIHH in Geneva early in the year. That would be quite interesting, but I sincerely doubt that Richemont headquarters would let this pass. But could be fun nevertheless. And I'm pretty convinced that we're going to see some changes too in the communication methods of Breitling. These ones being a little bit outdated, and we know of Mr. Kern's talent when it comes to digital. So these kind of old school ads with Mr. Travolta might be something of the past, or let's say that it will be revamped also. And I'm pretty sure we'll see some other ambassadors changing racing teams, as we know that Mr. Kern rather enjoys associating the companies he's overlooking with big name movie stars and personalities. And I think I expressed my point of view on the matter quite explicitly in one of our previous report. Well, as an entrepreneur myself, and if everything is confirmed, I can nevertheless only salute Mr. Kern's decision, and I think, simply put, that it seriously makes sense. Stepping down from the position he had requires quite a lot of courage, but I'm pretty sure that he weighed in on this pretty thoughtfully. And to be part of an entrepreneurial project can definitely be something super motivating and exhilarating for him, instead of only being this kind of super manager within a group where political games between teams and individuals must be something quite complicated and tiring to handle on a daily basis, well, especially in today's context. So it's a nice and inspiring fresh start for him, and we knew the man had a lot of energy, but I think this new challenge will tenfold his stamina. So it will be hard to follow for the team he will put in place, and consequently for his competitors too. Which leads me on the fact that I think this is particularly strange that he could actually do it, that there were no apparent non-competing clauses in his contract. Well, it's something that goes beyond me, I have to be honest. And coming back to the introduction of this video, I seriously doubt Stephen Curry could walk out so simply of his fresh contract with Golden State to join the Bulls. I mean, the breakup clauses must be stratospherical, and for Mr. Kern and the responsibilities he had, his internal know-how of the Richemont Group in every detail, and the idea of significantly reinforcing your very own competitor, well, that seems really strange that nothing existed. And if that's the case, well, there must be a few people in the legal department of the group whose ears must be fuming. I doubt Mr. Johan Rupert, the majority shareholder of the Richemont, is delighted with this quite shocking info. And this group is currently going through quite some turmoil, redefining who they are and how to do things. And this will not make things any easier, to say the least. And this is what we will uncover in the next season of our watchmaking TV series. And while I'm here, well, I also wanted to share quite a funny info regarding LVMH. Mr. Jean-Claude Biver, the man who is heading the watch division of the world's most important luxury group, meaning the brands Tag Heuer, Zenith and Hublot, but not the brands Bulgari or Louis Vuitton. Those have their own management teams. Well, Vuitton just introduced a new connected watch. This watch takes the design codes of the distinctive Tambour collection, and though it's in the same group, Louis Vuitton didn't use the technology developed for the Tag Heuer connected watch. They used an Android OS, and being 42mm wide, it's much smaller than the Tag version. It's probably a it's a pretty smart move for Louis Vuitton to offer such a product to their customer base, and looks pretty decent, I think, apart that it's outrageously expensive with a price set at $2,450 and for a product that we know will be outdated and obsolete in a couple of years at the most. Well, that's quite a lot of money to buy to be fashionable. But what is amusing is that despite being in the same group, well, Mr. Biver kind of trashed this new watch in a German newspaper, saying that it had been designed by a first-year design student, so no real kind words there, even if you're more or less in the same family. But at least he spoke his heart out on this one. So I get that this special report was a bit really business-oriented, a mix of who's who and prime time, and you know that I sincerely prefer to talk about actual timepieces, the people that make them, or the history of the brands. But this main info regarding Breitling, Richemont and Mr. Kern is something that I think was important enough to bring to you this hard news and share with you some behind-the-scene info regarding the industry. So all the best to you, and I would like to take this opportunity to again thank all of you who pledged a buck or two on our Patreon campaign to help us finance our activity. I'm a bit too Swiss and don't really like to ask for anything, but of course anything helps. So thanks for watching. Don't hesitate to share your thoughts on the subject of the day. Always makes me super happy to read your feedback, and you all have a great summer. Bye, see you real soon.